In the dead of winter, a flickering lantern pierced the icy fog, guiding a shadowy figure toward doom. But what deadly secret did its frozen light conceal? Welcome to The Frozen Lantern, a light that led to death. A chilling Poirot mystery that will keep you guessing until the bitter end. Grab a cup of hot tea, settle into your seat, and let the suspense unfold. If you're hooked on these twists, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The Blizzard's Arrival. The snow fell relentlessly over the quaint English village of Eldridge Hollow, blanketing the cobblestone streets in a silent, unforgiving white shroud. It was the kind of storm that locals whispered about in hushed tones, the sort that trapped travellers and unearthed long-buried secrets. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective with his impeccably waxed moustache and piercing grey eyes, had arrived just hours before the blizzard hit, invited by his old friend Captain Hastings for what was supposed to be a quiet weekend retreat at the grand but isolated Eldridge Manor. Little did they know, this gathering would turn deadly. As Poirot stepped off the train, his polished shoes crunching on the frosted platform, he adjusted his overcoat against the biting wind. "Ah, Hastings, mon ami," he greeted with his signature flair. "This English weather, it is as unpredictable as the human heart." Hastings, ever the enthusiastic companion, chuckled and led him to a waiting carriage. The manor belonged to Sir Reginald Thorne, a wealthy industrialist known for his collection of rare artifacts, including an ancient lantern said to have been forged in the frozen tundras of Siberia. Legend had it that the lantern's light never dimmed, even in the harshest conditions, a beacon of eternal hope, or so the stories claimed. That evening, as guests assembled in the manor's opulent drawing room, the fire crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the walls adorned with Thorne's treasures. There was Lady Evelyn Thorne, Sir Reginald's elegant wife, her eyes sharp and calculating. Dr. Elias Blackwood, a reclusive archaeologist who had accompanied Thorne on his Siberian expedition, Miss Clara Voss, a young journalist with a nose for scandal, and Mr. Victor Lang, Thorne's business partner, whose nervous glances betrayed underlying tensions. Poirot observed them all with his keen intellect, noting the subtle undercurrents of rivalry and resentment. Dinner proceeded amid polite conversation, but as the main course was served, roast pheasant with winter vegetables, the storm outside intensified, howling like a vengeful spirit. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When they restored, Sir Reginald stood abruptly, his face pale. "The lantern," he muttered. "I must check the frozen lantern in the study. It's invaluable." He excused himself, vanishing down the dimly lit hallway. Hours later, as the clock struck midnight, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the manor. The guests rushed to the study, where Sir Reginald lay sprawled on the floor, lifeless, his hand clutching the now extinguished lantern, its glass shattered and frosted over as if kissed by death itself. No footprints marred the fresh snow outside the window, and the door had been locked from within. Poirot's little grey cells sprang into action. "Murder, mes amis," he declared softly, "disguised as an accident in this frozen tomb." This puzzling scene set the stage for a web of deception, where every guest harboured a motive tied to Thorne's fortune and the lantern's cursed history. As the blizzard raged on, isolating them further, Poirot began his methodical unravelling of the truth. But who among them wielded the fatal blow, and how was it done in an impossible locked room? The answers lay buried in the snow, waiting to be unearthed in the chapters ahead. Chapter 2. The Shadows of Motive. The storm outside Eldridge Manor grew fiercer, its icy gusts rattling the windows as if demanding entry. Inside the study, the air was thick with shock and suspicion. The guests gathered around Sir Reginald Thorne's lifeless body. Hercule Poirot knelt beside the corpse, his gloved fingers tracing the edges of the shattered lantern, its once steady glow now reduced to a cold, jagged ruin. The room, lined with oak shelves and ancient maps, felt like a crypt. The weight of the locked door and snow-sealed windows pressing in on everyone. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the faces of the gathered party, each one a potential suspect, each one hiding something. Lady Evelyn Thorne stood closest to the door, her silk shawl trembling slightly in her grip. Her composure, so polished during dinner, had cracked, her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at her husband's body. Dr. Elias Blackwood, the archaeologist, hovered near a bookshelf, his gaunt face unreadable, but his fingers twitching as if itching to flee. Miss Clara Voss, the journalist, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, her eyes darting between the body and the other guests, as if she sensed a story darker than any she'd chased before. Victor Lang, the business partner, paced near the fireplace, muttering about the locked door and the impossibility of it all. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by Poirot, his brow furrowed with concern. "This is madness, Poirot," he whispered. "How could anyone have done this?" Poirot rose, brushing dust from his knees with meticulous care. "Madness, Hastings? No, it is method. A murder so bold requires a mind both cunning and desperate." He turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. "No one leaves this manor until we uncover the truth. The blizzard is our jailer, but I, Hercule Poirot, am the key." He began his questioning, starting with Lady Evelyn. She claimed she'd been in the drawing room with the others when the scream, Clara's they later learned, pierced the night. Yet her eyes flickered when Poirot asked about her husband's obsession with the lantern. "It was his pride," she said curtly. "He believed it held power, some ancient magic. I thought it nonsense." Dr. Blackwood next spoke of the lantern's origins with a scholar's precision. He described its discovery in a Siberian cave, etched with symbols no one could fully decipher. Reginald was consumed by it, he admitted, his voice low. He thought it could unlock secrets, wealth, influence, perhaps more. But when pressed about his own interest, Blackwood grew evasive, claiming he was merely a guest, not a partner in Thorne's ventures. Poirot noted the man's calloused hands, unusual for a scholar, and filed it away for later. Clara Voss was more forthcoming, her journalist's instinct overriding her fear. She admitted to sneaking into the study earlier that evening, hoping to photograph the lantern for a story on Thorne's collection. "I didn't touch it," she insisted, "but I saw him, Reginald, polishing it like it was alive. He caught me and was furious, said I'd never understand its value." Her words hung in the air, hinting at a confrontation that might have turned deadly. Victor Lang, meanwhile, was a bundle of nerves, claiming he'd been in the billiard room alone, nursing a brandy, when the scream rang out. His alibi was shaky, and his constant fidgeting drew Poirot's scrutiny. "Reginald and I had our differences," Lang confessed, "but murder, never." As Poirot pieced together these accounts, he noticed a curious detail. A faint smear of wax on the study's desk, near where the lantern had stood. It wasn't from the lantern itself, which burned no candles, but from something else, perhaps a tool or weapon used in the crime. The locked door and unmarred snow outside suggested an inside job. Yet the mechanics of it baffled even Poirot's brilliant mind. He instructed Hastings to guard the study while he led the guests back to the drawing room, their footsteps heavy with unease. The night stretched on, the storm's howl a constant reminder of their isolation. Poirot sat by the fire, his fingers steepled, his thoughts racing. Each suspect had a motive. Evelyn's strained marriage, Blackwood's secretive past, Clara's ambition, Lang's business disputes, but motive alone wasn't enough. The lantern, that cursed relic, seemed to tie them all together, its broken glass a silent witness to the crime. As the firelight danced, Poirot sensed the truth was close, yet maddeningly out of reach. The next step would be to uncover what each guest wasn't saying, the secrets they guarded as fiercely as the manor's walls. Chapter 3. The Hidden Passage. The fire in the drawing room of Eldridge Manor cast a feeble glow, barely holding back the chill that seeped through the walls as the blizzard roared outside. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his eyes glinting with quiet intensity as he observed the guests, each one cloaked in their own unease. The murder of Sir Reginald Thorne hung over them like a spectre, and the locked study with its shattered lantern remained a puzzle that defied logic. Poirot knew the key to unravelling this mystery lay not just in what was said, but in what was concealed. Secrets buried deeper than the snow outside. Determined to uncover more, Poirot excused himself from the drawing room, beckoning Captain Hastings to follow. "Mon ami," he murmured, "we must explore the manor itself. A locked room is only as secure as its walls." They slipped into the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. Poirot's attention was drawn to the study's outer wall, where a heavy tapestry depicting a Siberian hunt hung. Its intricate stitching seemed oddly out of place in the scholarly room. With a gentle tug, he pulled it aside, revealing a narrow wooden panel that creaked under his touch. A hidden door, barely noticeable, stood before them. "Hastings, regardez," Poirot exclaimed, his voice a mix of triumph and caution. The panel, when pressed, opened with a groan, revealing a cramped passageway, its air stale and heavy with dust. A faint draught carried the scent of cold stone, suggesting it led somewhere beyond the manor's main walls. Poirot lit a small oil lamp from a nearby table, its flame casting eerie shadows as they ventured inside. The passage was narrow, its walls rough-hewn, and it sloped downward, twisting toward an unknown destination. "This," Poirot said, "could explain the impossible, a murderer who enters and exits without disturbing the snow." The passage ended at a rusted iron grate, barely visible through a tangle of ivy, opening to the manor's rear courtyard. Snow piled high outside, but the grate was untouched, suggesting no one had passed through recently. Yet Poirot's sharp eyes caught a glint. Two small metallic shavings caught in the grate's hinges, as if someone had tampered with it in the past. "Not tonight, perhaps," he mused, "but this passage has been used before. We must learn its purpose." Returning to the study, Poirot examined the room with renewed focus. The hidden door's latch was cleverly concealed behind a bookshelf, requiring precise pressure to open. It was a mechanism only someone familiar with the manor's secrets would know. His thoughts turned to the guests. Lady Evelyn, as Thorne's wife, would likely know the manor's quirks, but her delicate demeanour suggested she rarely ventured beyond its polished halls. Dr. Blackwood, with his knowledge of ancient structures, might have recognised such a passage from his archaeological work. Clara Voss, ever curious, could have stumbled upon it while snooping, and Victor Lang, with his nervous energy, might have used it for clandestine business dealings. Poirot gathered the guests in the study once more, this time revealing the hidden passage. Gasps filled the room as the panel creaked open. Lady Evelyn's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide. "I had no idea," she whispered, though her voice wavered. Blackwood's expression darkened, his fingers clenching as he muttered about old houses and their tricks. Clara's eyes sparkled with intrigue, her pen already scratching notes. Lang, however, paled, stepping back as if the passage itself accused him. Poirot watched their reactions closely, noting every flicker of fear or surprise. "The passage changes everything," Poirot declared. "It is a shadow in our puzzle, a path to truth or deception. Who among you knew of its existence?" Silence followed, broken only by the storm's distant howl. Each denied knowledge, but Poirot sensed lies woven into their words. He dismissed them, instructing Hastings to keep watch over the passage's entrance. Alone in the study, Poirot's mind raced. The passage suggested a premeditated act, but the wax smear and broken lantern hinted at something more impulsive. The truth lay in the balance between planning and passion, and Poirot was determined to tip the scales. Chapter 4. The whisper of the past. The storm's relentless howl battered Eldridge Manor, its icy fingers clawing at the windows as if eager to unearth the secrets within. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the study, the hidden passage now sealed behind its tapestry, but its existence gnawed at his mind. The metallic shavings in the grate and the wax smear on the desk were pieces of a puzzle, but they lacked context. To solve this murder, Poirot needed to dig into the history of the manor and the frozen lantern itself. He sensed that Sir Reginald Thorne's obsession with the artifact held the key to his death. Poirot moved to the manor's library, a cavernous room filled with leather-bound tomes and the faint scent of aged paper. The fire here burned low, casting long shadows across the shelves. He began his search, pulling books on Siberian artifacts and local history, his fingers deftly flipping through pages. One volume, a faded journal penned by a previous owner of the manor, caught his eye. It detailed the construction of Eldridge Manor in the 17th century, mentioning secret ways built to evade tax collectors or hide from invaders. The passage he'd found was no accident. It was part of the manor's design, known to few. But had Thorne shared this knowledge with anyone? As Poirot read on, he uncovered a reference to the frozen lantern, acquired by Thorne's grandfather during a Russian expedition. The journal described it as a light of the eternal frost, rumoured to be cursed by a Siberian shaman who imbued it with power to guide or destroy. The curse, dismissed as folklore, claimed that those who misused the lantern's light would meet a grim fate. Poirot's moustache twitched as he considered this. Superstition, perhaps, he murmured, but superstition can inspire murder. Seeking more, Poirot summoned the butler, Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the manor's history. Grayson, who had served the Thorne family for decades, confirmed the lantern's legend. "Sir Reginald was consumed by it, sir," he said, his voice trembling. He'd spend hours in the study, staring at its glow, muttering about its power to reveal truths. He even claimed it showed him visions, deaths, betrayals, things he wouldn't speak of openly. When asked about the hidden passage, Grayson hesitated, then admitted, "I knew of it, sir, but it's been unused for years. Only Sir Reginald and I were aware, to my knowledge." Poirot's next move was to confront the guests about the lantern's curse. Back in the drawing room, he posed the question with calculated calm. "Did Sir Reginald ever speak of the lantern's power to any of you?" Lady Evelyn's face tightened, and she shook her head, claiming ignorance. Dr. Blackwood, however, leaned forward, his voice low. "He mentioned it once in Siberia, said it could see through lies. I thought it was the ramblings of a tired man." Clara Voss admitted to hearing rumours of the curse while researching Thorne's collection, but she scoffed at it. Victor Lang, sweating despite the cold, stammered that Thorne had once accused him of disloyalty while holding the lantern, as if it had whispered the truth. A new clue emerged when Poirot noticed a small, ornate key on the floor near the study's desk, half hidden under a rug. It didn't fit the study's lock or the passage's grate, but its intricate design suggested it belonged to something valuable, perhaps a safe or a locked box. Poirot pocketed it, his mind racing. The lantern's curse, the hidden passage, and now this key pointed to a deeper motive, one tied to Thorne's paranoia and the secrets he believed the lantern revealed. Had someone killed him to silence those truths? As the night deepened, the guests grew restless, their glances darting suspiciously. Poirot knew he was closing in, but the puzzle remained incomplete. The lantern's history and the manor's secrets were threads in a tangled web, and the key in his pocket felt like a promise of answers. He resolved to search for what it unlocked, sensing it would lead him closer to the murderer's identity. Chapter 5. The Locked Box. The blizzard outside Eldridge Manor raged on, its relentless winds howling like a chorus of restless spirits. Inside, The tension among the guests was palpable, each one eyeing the others as if expecting a confession to spill forth. Hercule Poirot, however, remained focused, the small ornate key he'd found in the study now burning a metaphorical hole in his pocket. Its intricate design suggested it unlocked something significant, something that might explain why Sir Reginald Thorne's life ended beside the shattered frozen lantern. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with anticipation. He was on the cusp of a breakthrough. He excused himself from the drawing room, where the guests sat in uneasy silence, and returned to the study, Captain Hastings trailing behind. The room, still heavy with the chill of death, held secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's eyes scanned the shelves, the desk, the walls, searching for anything that might match the key. Near the fireplace, partially obscured by a stack of ledgers, he noticed a small, ebony box, its surface carved with the same cryptic Siberian symbols as the lantern. The keyhole was a perfect match. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low. "This box may hold the heart of our mystery." With a soft click, the key turned and the lid sprang open. Inside lay a collection of papers, letters, contracts, and a single photograph, yellowed with age. The photograph showed a younger Sir Reginald and Dr. Blackwood in a snowy Siberian landscape, standing beside the frozen lantern, their faces grim. The letters were more revealing, correspondence between Thorne and a mysterious contact, discussing a debt unpaid and a betrayal in the ice. One letter, written in a shaky hand, warned Thorne to "beware the lantern's truth, for it sees all." Poirot's brow furrowed. These were not mere business dealings. They hinted at a personal vendetta, one that might have driven someone to murder. The contracts were equally intriguing. They detailed a partnership between Thorne and Victor Lang, outlining a venture to sell rare artifacts, including the lantern, to a foreign buyer, but a clause scrawled in Thorne's hand indicated he'd backed out, refusing to part with the lantern. Had Lang's financial hopes been crushed, giving him motive? Poirot tucked the papers into his coat, knowing they'd spark telling reactions from the suspects. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot decided to test the waters. He held up the key, letting it catch the firelight. "This," he announced, "unlocked a box that reveals much about Sir Reginald's fears. Who among you knew of his secrets?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, but she quickly masked her surprise, claiming ignorance. Dr. Blackwood's jaw tightened, and he muttered about Thorne's foolish paranoia. Clara Voss leaned forward. Her journalist's curiosity piqued, asking if the box contained proof of the lantern's curse. Victor Lang, however, reacted most strongly, his face draining of colour as he stammered, "What box? I know nothing of any box." Poirot noted Lang's panic, but pressed further, mentioning the letters without revealing their contents. The room grew tense, each guest shifting uncomfortably. He observed Clara's eager scribbling, Blackwood's clenched fists, and Evelyn's sudden interest in her teacup. The photograph he kept to himself, sensing its significance required more context. The box had confirmed that Thorne's death was tied to his past, a past that one of these guests shared and feared exposed. As the storm's wail intensified, Poirot felt the pieces aligning. The box's contents pointed to betrayal, greed, and perhaps a fear of the lantern's supposed power. But how had the murderer struck in a locked room? The key and its secrets were a step forward, but the method of the crime remained elusive. Poirot resolved to probe deeper into the relationships between Thorne and his guests, certain that the next clue would lie in their shared history. Chapter 6: The Fractured Bonds. The storm outside Eldridge Manor showed no signs of relenting, its icy gusts hammering the walls as if urging the truth to break free. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken accusations, the guests' faces etched with suspicion and fear. Hercule Poirot, his mind sharp as ever, knew the contents of the ebony box, letters, contracts, and that haunting photograph. pointed to a web of personal betrayals. To unravel the murder of Sir Reginald Thorne, he needed to probe the relationships that bound these suspects together, relationships that had festered into motives for murder. Poirot gathered the guests in the dining hall, where a cold breakfast lay untouched, the clink of silverware absent in the tense silence. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the polished floor, his eyes studying each face. "Mes amis," he began, his voice steady. "Sir Reginald's death was no accident. It was born of passion, of secrets shared and broken. Let us speak of your ties to him, and to each other." His words hung like a challenge, and the room seemed to shrink under their weight. He started with Lady Evelyn, whose poised exterior seemed to falter under his gaze. She admitted her marriage to Thorne had been strained for years. "Reginald cared more for his artifacts than for me," she said, her voice bitter. "He changed after Siberia, became distant, obsessed with that wretched lantern." When Poirot asked if she resented his obsession, her eyes flashed. "Resent? I despised it, but I didn't kill him." Her words were firm, but her trembling hands suggested a deeper turmoil. Dr. Blackwood was next, his gaunt face tense, as he recounted his time with Thorne in Siberia. "We were partners in exploration, not friends," he said curtly. "Reginald was reckless, always chasing myths over facts. The lantern was his folly, not mine." Yet Poirot sensed a grudge in Blackwood's tone, especially when he mentioned a disagreement over the expedition's profits. Could a financial betrayal have lingered, festering into violence? Clara Voss, the journalist, spoke with a mix of bravado and unease. She revealed she'd been investigating Thorne for months, suspecting his artifact dealings skirted legality. "I came here to get close to him, to uncover the truth about his collection," she admitted. "He didn't trust me, especially after I asked about the lantern's origins." Her ambition was clear, but had her probing pushed Thorne, or someone else, to a deadly edge? Victor Lang's interrogation was the most telling. His nervous energy had escalated, his hands fidgeting as he spoke of his business partnership with Thorne. "We built an empire together," he said, his voice cracking. "But he betrayed me, pulling out of deals at the last moment, hoarding that lantern like it was his soul." When Poirot mentioned the contract from the box, Lang froze, then stammered, "I didn't know he kept records of that." His reaction betrayed a deeper involvement, perhaps a motive rooted in ruined ambitions. As Poirot pressed further, a new detail emerged. A heated argument between Thorne and Lang, overheard by the butler, Grayson, the night before the murder. Grayson, reluctantly drawn into the conversation, recounted how Lang had stormed out of the study, shouting about broken promises. This placed Lang near the scene of the crime, but it didn't explain the locked room or the shattered lantern. Poirot's mind circled back to the photograph of Thorne and Blackwood in Siberia. Had their expeditions sown the seeds of this murder? The guests' stories revealed fractured bonds, each one tainted by resentment or greed, yet the mechanics of the crime remained elusive. Poirot noted a subtle glance between Evelyn and Blackwood, a fleeting moment that suggested a connection beyond what they'd admitted. Had they conspired, or was it merely shared guilt? The truth was close, but the final piece, how the murder was executed, still eluded him. He resolved to search the manor for physical evidence, certain that the next clue would tie these fractured bonds to the fatal act. Chapter 7. The Silent Witnesses. The unrelenting blizzard continued to lash against Eldridge Manor, its fury undiminished as dawn's pale light struggled to pierce the thick curtains of snow. The guests, weary from the night's interrogations, had retired to their rooms under Hastings' watchful eye, but sleep eluded them all, the shadow of murder hanging heavy in the air. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the exhaustion creeping into his bones, knew that motives and relationships were but half the puzzle. The true enigma lay in the how, the method by which Sir Reginald Thorne had been slain in a room sealed tighter than a tomb. With the fractured bonds now laid bare, Poirot turned his attention to the silent witnesses, the physical clues scattered like breadcrumbs in the study. He began his meticulous search at first light, the manor's corridors echoing with the muffled howls of the wind. The study, cordoned off since the discovery of the body, felt even colder now, the shattered lantern still lying where it had fallen, its frosted glass glinting mockingly in the dim light. Poirot donned his gloves once more, his movements precise and deliberate, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. He started with the wax smear on the desk, that faint, anomalous mark he had noted earlier. It was not from any ordinary candle. Its texture was smoother, almost translucent, with a subtle sheen that suggested it had been melted recently. Scooping a small sample onto a handkerchief, Poirot examined it under a magnifying glass he carried in his pocket. "Ah, not beeswax, no," he murmured to himself. "This is paraffin, perhaps from a seal or something more insidious." His gaze shifted to the body, now covered with a sheet but still positioned as it had been found, hand outstretched toward the lantern. The cause of death appeared to be a blow to the head, but the wound was peculiar, clean, with no blood spatter, as if struck by something blunt yet precise. No weapon lay nearby, and the room's furnishings offered no obvious candidates. Poirot circled the desk, his eyes tracing the floorboards for any irregularities. Near the hidden passage's entrance, he spotted a faint scuff mark, barely visible against the dark wood, as if something heavy had been dragged briefly. It aligned with the metallic shavings he had found in the grate. Tiny flecks of iron, perhaps from a tool or a makeshift device. Intrigued, Poirot knelt and ran his fingers along the edge of the bookshelf concealing the passage. There, wedged in a narrow crack, he discovered a small fragment of wire, thin and flexible, coated in the same paraffin wax. His mind raced, connecting the dots. A trap, perhaps, or a mechanism to deliver death from afar. He pocketed the wire, his thoughts turning to the lantern itself. The artifact's eternal light, now extinguished, had been its defining feature. Poirot recalled from the journal that it burned without fuel, powered by some ancient chemical reaction. But the shattering, had it been accidental or deliberate? Examining the shards closely, he noticed one piece bore a tiny puncture, as if pierced by a projectile. To test his emerging theory, Poirot summoned Hastings to assist in a reconstruction. "Mon ami, we must simulate the scene," he instructed, positioning Hastings at the desk as Thorne might have been. Poirot then retreated to the hidden passage, closing the panel behind him. From within the narrow confines, he experimented with the wire, threading it through a small gap in the paneling he hadn't noticed before. A ventilation slit, cleverly disguised, with a length of wire coated in wax for smoothness. One could conceivably loop it around a trigger or even fashion a garrote-like device, but that didn't fit the head wound. No, it was subtler. Poirot envisioned a slingshot mechanism, using the wire as a guide to launch a small object, perhaps an ice projectile, melted away by the room's residual warmth, leaving no trace. The idea struck him like a bolt. Ice! In this frozen manner, with the blizzard providing endless supply, an ice dart or bolt could have been fashioned, propelled through the slit, striking Thorne, and then dissolving into nothingness. The wax, used to seal or lubricate the makeshift launcher, the metallic shavings could be from filing down a tool to create the projectile's mold. It explained the locked door, the untouched snow, the absence of a weapon. But who had the ingenuity and the access to set such a trap? Poirot emerged from the passage, his face alight with revelation, though he kept his theory close for now. He decided to inspect the guests' rooms discreetly, starting with Dr. Blackwood's, given his archaeological background and familiarity with tools. In Blackwood's valise, hidden beneath folded clothes, Poirot found a small file, its teeth flecked with iron residue matching the shavings. A damning clue, but not conclusive. In Victor Lang's room, A half-burned candle stub of paraffin wax sat on the nightstand, its scent matching the smear. Lady Evelyn's quarters yielded a pair of gloves with faint stains, possibly from handling ice or chemicals. Clara Voss's notebook contained sketches of the lantern, including notes on its vulnerabilities, as if she had studied it for more than a story. These discoveries painted a picture of collective suspicion, but Poirot sensed a convergence. The subtle glance he had observed between Evelyn and Blackwood now took on new meaning, perhaps an affair, fueled by Thorne's neglect, leading to a collaborative plot. Or was Lang's desperation the driving force, with others as accomplices? The wire fragment tied it to the passage, suggesting the killer had intimate knowledge of the manor's secrets. As the morning wore on, the guests reconvened in the drawing room, their faces drawn from lack of sleep. Poirot watched them closely, the silent witnesses in his mind whispering their accusations. He knew he must confront them with these findings, but carefully, to provoke the slip that would reveal the culprit. The method was clear now, a clever use of ice and ingenuity, but the hand that wielded it remained shadowed. With the storm beginning to wane, time was short. The outside world would soon intrude, and the murderer might escape. Poirot steeled himself for the final unmasking, the confrontation that would bring light to this frozen darkness. Chapter 8. The Tangle of Truth. The blizzard outside Eldridge Manor had begun to weaken, its ferocious howls softening into a mournful whine, as if the storm itself sensed the unravelling of the mystery within. The pale light of late morning filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting a ghostly pallor over the drawing-room where the guests sat, their faces drawn with exhaustion and dread. Hercule Poirot stood before them, his posture impeccable, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man who had glimpsed the truth but needed one final push to seize it. The clues, the wax smear, the wire fragment, the metallic shavings, and the ice projectile theory had illuminated the method of Sir Reginald Thorne's murder. Now Poirot's task was to weave these threads into a tapestry that revealed the killer's identity, and he knew the only way was to provoke a reaction that would betray the guilty. He began by pacing the room, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to echo the ticking of a clock counting down to revelation. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady yet laced with a quiet menace. "We are close to the truth. The murder of Sir Reginald was a masterpiece of cunning, executed with a precision that rivals my own little grey cells. But the murderer, they have left traces, silent witnesses that speak louder than words." He held up the fragment of wire, its paraffin coating catching the firelight, and watched the guests' faces for the telltale flicker of recognition. Lady Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the arm of her chair, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Blackwood's gaunt face betrayed a momentary twitch, his hands folding tightly in his lap as if to steady himself. Clara Voss, ever the journalist, leaned forward, her notebook abandoned for once, her gaze fixed on the wire with a mix of curiosity and unease. Victor Lang, however, was a portrait of panic, his face flushed, his eyes darting to the exits as if contemplating flight. Poirot noted every reaction, filing them away like cards in a high-stakes game. He began to lay out his findings, careful not to reveal the full extent of his theory. The wax smear in the study, he said, was not from a candle, but from a mechanism, perhaps to guide a weapon through the hidden passage's ventilation slit. The metallic shavings suggest a tool was filed to craft a mould, perhaps for a projectile of ice, which melted away, leaving no trace. This explains the locked room, the untouched snow. A murmur rippled through the group, and Poirot pressed on, his voice rising slightly. But such ingenuity requires knowledge of the manor, of the passage, of Sir Reginald's habits. Who among you possesses such intimacy? He turned first to Dr. Blackwood, whose archaeological expertise made him a prime candidate for crafting a precise tool. You, monsieur, have handled artifacts and tools in the frozen wastes of Siberia. Did you use your skills to fashion a weapon? Blackwood's eyes flashed with indignation. I'm a scholar, not a murderer, he snapped. If I wanted Thorne dead, I'd have done it years ago in the tundra. Not here. Yet his defensiveness, coupled with the file found in his valise, kept him in Poirot's sights. Next, Poirot addressed Victor Lang, whose nervous demeanour had only worsened. You, Monsieur Lang, were betrayed by Sir Reginald's refusal to sell the lantern, yes. Your empire was at stake, and the paraffin candle in your room. Curious, is it not, that it matches the wax in the study? Lang's face crumpled and he stammered, I used the candle for light, nothing more. I didn't know about any passage. His protests were loud, but his voice trembled, and Poirot sensed a lie buried in his fear. Lady Evelyn was next, her composure a fragile mask. Madame, you knew the manor's secrets, perhaps even the passage, and your gloves, stained, perhaps by handling ice or chemicals. Did you seek to end a marriage that had become a prison? Evelyn's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. You accuse me in my own home, Monsieur Poirot. I loved Reginald, despite his flaws. Those stains are from my gardening, nothing sinister. But her eyes lingered on Blackwood, a fleeting glance that Poirot caught, reigniting his suspicion of a deeper connection. Clara Voss, when questioned, admitted to her sketches of the lantern, but denied any role in the murder. I wanted a story, not blood, she said, her voice steady but her hands restless. If I'd known about a passage, I'd have written about it, not used it to kill. Her ambition was undeniable, but Poirot wondered if her curiosity had led her to stumble upon more than she admitted. To stir the pot further, Poirot revealed the photograph from the ebony box, holding it up for all to see. This image, taken in Siberia, shows Sir Reginald and Dr. Blackwood with the lantern. A moment of triumph or betrayal. Blackwood's face darkened, and he admitted to a falling out with Thorne over the expedition's spoils. He kept the lantern for himself, Blackwood said bitterly. It was meant to be shared. Evelyn's eyes widened at this, and Poirot sensed a crack in their alliance, perhaps a shared secret from that frozen journey. As the interrogation continued, a new clue emerged. The butler, Grayson, hesitantly approached Poirot after the guests dispersed, his face pale. "Sir, I remembered something," he whispered. "The night before the murder, I saw Dr. Blackwood near the study, carrying a small satchel. I thought nothing of it then, but—" Poirot's mind seized on this. A satchel could have held tools, wax, or even ice prepared in advance. He thanked Grayson, his thoughts racing to connect this to the glance between Blackwood and Evelyn. Were they conspirators, or was one manipulating the other? The day wore on, the storms weakening, allowing faint sounds of the outside world to creep in. A distant cart, the crunch of snow underfoot. Time was slipping away, and Poirot knew he must act swiftly. The clues pointed to a calculated plot, likely involving the passage and an ice projectile, but the question of who remained. Blackwood's expertise, Lang's desperation, Evelyn's hidden pain, Clara's probing, all were plausible, yet none fully fit. Poirot resolved to stage a final confrontation, to lay a trap as cunning as the murderers, using the lantern itself as bait to draw out the guilty. Chapter 9. The Lantern's Lure. The storm outside Eldridge Manor had dwindled to a faint whisper, leaving an eerie stillness that seemed to amplify the tension within. The drawing room, where Hercule Poirot now stood, was bathed in the cold light of a winter afternoon, the frost on the windows fracturing the sun's rays into jagged patterns. The guests, summoned once more, sat in a semicircle, their faces a mix of defiance, fear, and exhaustion. Poirot knew the moment had come to lay his trap. The clues, the paraffin-coated wire, the metallic shavings, the ice projectile theory, and the tangled web of motives had brought him to the brink of revelation. Now he would use the frozen lantern itself, or rather its mystique, to lure the murderer into a fatal mistake. Poirot held the broken lantern aloft, its shattered glass catching the light like a fractured star. "This," he declared, his voice resonant with authority, "is the heart of our tragedy. Sir Reginald believed it held power, a light that revealed truths, and one of you, driven by fear or greed, extinguished both it and him." He paused, letting the words settle, his eyes sweeping over the group. Lady Evelyn's gaze was steely, but her fingers twitched. Dr. Blackwood's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the lantern, as if it accused him directly. Clara Voss's curiosity seemed tempered by unease, her pen idle in her hand. Victor Lang, pale and sweating, looked ready to bolt. To set his trap, Poirot announced a bold plan. "Tonight we shall recreate the moment of the murder. I have repaired the lantern, or so it appears." He gestured to a replica he had crafted from spare glass and a small oil lamp, its glow mimicking the original's eerie light. "We will place it in the study, and I shall remain there alone, as Sir Reginald did. The murderer, if they dare, may try again." Hastings, standing by the door, protested. "Poirot, that's madness!" But Poirot silenced him with a raised hand. "Non, mon ami, it is method. The guilty will not resist the bait." He instructed the guests to retire to their rooms until evening, under Hastings' supervision, while he and the butler, Grayson, prepared the study. Poirot carefully positioned the replica lantern on the desk, aligning it with the ventilation slit in the hidden passage. He rigged a thin thread, nearly invisible, across the slit, designed to snap if disturbed, alerting him to any intrusion. In the passage itself, he placed a small mirror to catch any movement, ensuring he could monitor both the study and its secret entrance. "The murderer will come," he murmured to Grayson, "drawn by the lantern's lure, or by the fear of what I might uncover." As night fell, the manor grew deathly quiet, the storm's absence leaving only the creak of old wood and the distant tick of a clock. Poirot sat at the desk, the replica lantern casting its deceptive glow, his senses attuned to every sound. Hours passed, the tension mounting, until a faint rustle came from the passage. The thread snapped, and the mirror reflected a shadow moving stealthily. Poirot's heart quickened, but he remained still, his hand resting on a concealed bell to summon Hastings if needed. The panel creaked open, and a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness. Poirot's voice cut through the silence. "Stop, monsieur or madame, the game is over." The figure froze, and as Poirot lit a second lamp, Dr. Blackwood's gaunt face came into view, a small metal tool in his hand, its tip gleaming with fresh wax. "You thought to strike again," Poirot said, "but the lantern has betrayed you." Blackwood's eyes darted to the replica, realization dawning. "It's a fake," he hissed, but Poirot was relentless. "You used the passage, the ice projectile, the wax to guide it. Why? Because Sir Reginald knew of your betrayal in Siberia." Blackwood's composure cracked. "He cheated me," he spat. "The lantern was ours, but he kept it, hoarded it, claimed it spoke to him. I couldn't let him ruin me." His confession poured forth, detailing how he'd crafted an ice dart, filed from a tool, and used the passage to fire it through the slit, shattering the lantern in the process. But before Poirot could summon Hastings, a second figure appeared. Lady Evelyn, her face pale, a letter clutched in her hand. "It wasn't just him," she cried. "I helped. Reginald's obsession was destroying us all." The revelation stunned Poirot, but his trap had worked. Blackwood and Evelyn, bound by their shared resentment, had conspired, each playing a role in the intricate murder. The lantern's lure had drawn them out, and the truth was finally exposed. As Hastings rushed in to restrain them, Poirot felt a pang of satisfaction, tempered by the tragedy of it all. One final step remained to ensure justice was served. Chapter 10. The Light of Justice. The air in Eldridge Manor was still. the storm's final whispers fading into a crisp silence as the morning sun broke through the clouds. Bathing the drawing room in a pale, cleansing light, Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the gathered guests, his presence commanding, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the sleepless nights. The replica lantern, its deceptive glow extinguished, sat on a table nearby, a silent testament to the trap that had unmasked the killers. Dr. Blackwood and Lady Evelyn, now under Hastings' watchful guard, sat apart, their faces etched with defeat. Clara Voss and Victor Lang, though shaken, watched with rapt attention, sensing the climax of this grim drama. Poirot's little grey cells had pieced together the puzzle, and now, before the manor's isolation ended, he would reveal the full truth of Sir Reginald Thorne's murder. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant, "the frozen lantern has guided us to death, but now it leads to justice. This was no simple murder. It was a conspiracy born of greed, betrayal, and a cursed relic's shadow." He paced slowly, his eyes locking onto each guest in turn, ensuring their focus. "Let us unravel the threads, step by step, to see how Dr. Elias Blackwood and Lady Evelyn Thorne wove their deadly plan." Poirot first recounted the method, the ingenious mechanism that had baffled them all. The locked study, the untouched snow, these were not miracles but the work of a cunning mind. An ice projectile, crafted from a mould filed with a tool, was propelled through a ventilation slit in the hidden passage. The wax smear on the desk, the paraffin-coated wire, the metallic shavings, all pointed to a slingshot-like device, lubricated and guided to deliver a fatal blow to Sir Reginald's head. The ice melted, leaving no weapon, and the lantern shattered, perhaps by the projectile's force or as a symbolic act. This explained the impossible crime. He turned to Dr. Blackwood, whose gaunt face was now a mask of resignation. "You, monsieur, were the architect. Your archaeological expertise gave you the skill to craft such a device. The file in your valise, flecked with iron, betrayed you. You knew the manor's passage from your time with Sir Reginald in Siberia, where you explored its history together. But why? The photograph in the ebony box told me. A betrayal in the ice. Sir Reginald kept the lantern, denying you your share of its promised wealth. You harboured this grudge for years, and when he refused to sell it, your resentment turned to murder." Blackwood's shoulders slumped, but he said nothing, his silence a confession. Poirot then faced Lady Evelyn, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And you, madame, were his accomplice. Your marriage was a prison, strained by Sir Reginald's obsession with the lantern. The letters in the box spoke of his paranoia, his belief that the lantern revealed betrayals, perhaps even yours. The stained gloves in your room, the glance you shared with Dr. Blackwood, these hinted at an affair, a bond forged in shared resentment. You knew the passage, as the manor's mistress, and you helped Blackwood plan the murder, perhaps supplying the paraffin or preparing the ice." Evelyn's voice broke as she spoke. "He was destroying us," she whispered. "The lantern consumed him, made him cruel. Elias promised we'd be free, that we'd sell it and start anew." Her confession confirmed Poirot's suspicions. A pact born of desperation, executed with chilling precision. But Poirot wasn't finished. He addressed Clara Voss and Victor Lang, clearing their roles. "Mademoiselle Voss, your sketches and probing were driven by ambition, not murder. You sought a story, not blood, though your presence in the study that night raised suspicions." Clara nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. "And Monsieur Lang," Poirot continued, "your desperation over broken deals made you a suspect, but the paraffin in your room was mere coincidence. Your argument with Sir Reginald was real, but you lacked the cunning for this crime." The final piece was the lantern's curse, which Poirot dismissed as superstition, but acknowledged as a catalyst. Sir Reginald believed it saw truths, and perhaps it did, exposing the greed and betrayal in those around him. It drove Blackwood and Evelyn to kill, fearing its revelations or craving its value. He gestured to the replica. This false light drew them out, proving their guilt. As Hastings prepared to escort Blackwood and Evelyn to the authorities, now reachable with the storm's end, Poirot addressed the room one last time. The frozen lantern's light is extinguished, but justice burns bright. Let this be a lesson. No secret can hide from the truth. The guests dispersed, shaken but relieved, as the manor's oppressive air lifted. If you've been gripped by this tale of mystery and betrayal, take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Comment below with your thoughts on Poirot's deductions, or what mysteries you'd love to see next. Until then, keep your lanterns lit and your secrets safe.